Can we lower that? Move that to a table and I'll just sit and relax.
Sure. Or do you want to just sit here and we'll lower this? So where do you want to sit? Now you could also sit. We can put a chair here. And just lower this, yeah. Yeah. So let me just lower this.
Was very sweet. So thank you. Really nice. And of course, you're such a big part of the. We're a team. Yeah. Yes.
Hello.
So Stan is going to introduce you.
Maybe put it a little bit off to the side so I can see the people in front of me here, and not just the computers. That's better. Okay. Hello. Good evening, everyone. The whole world is online here.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
So if everybody could please, Stan is going to introduce Rabbi Feinstein. So.
Ooh, I get an introduction.
I never get an introduction. So
it's a machai. Well, you come by me. I'll give you an introduction. By me, you're a grandpa. You're a Zeta in my place. That's your distinction, you see.
For someone who needs no introduction, that's the kind of introduction.
Thank you very much.
As you know, Rabbi Feinstein is known as Eddie, and he's in the neighborhood.
In this neighborhood, I am. Yeah.
He used to be right down the street there.
Oh, the goose that laid the golden brownies. He's dead. That's the problem.
And he's graced us. The last time that he spoke was only via Zoom, and here we are in person again. The last time he spoke to us, it was about Rabbi Schulweis of blessed memory, who, of course, Rabbi Feinstein took over from him and learned from him. And we now have the blessing of learning from both of them. So whatever he has to say, amen.
I haven't said anything yet. Wait. I could declare Jesus Christ my Lord and Savior. You'd be stuck, Stanley. That's good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's nice to be here. I haven't been here in a long time. I grew up in this neighborhood. This was the JCC. Actually, this was Laura Glassner's house. She was my sixth grade classmate. She was the biggest kid in sixth grade, and she wanted to be a doctor. And when she announced that to the class, somebody said, "You can't be a doctor, you're a girl." So she pounded that kid into the asphalt, and we all agreed she could be a doctor. Anyway, it's fun to walk around this neighborhood because I know what everything used to be, several generations ago. So it's very sweet to be here. I hope everybody is well. I have lots of things we could talk about, but I want to talk about what you want to talk about. So I used to give lectures and then ask for questions, and the questions were always better than the lecture. So if you have a question you've been dying to ask a rabbi whose name isn't Vorspan, this is your chance. Actually, David and we could share answers. So if anyone has a question they've been dying to ask a rabbi, this is your big chance. Because I don't live here, I'm going to leave, so you don't have to be embarrassed. Ask the question whose answer you have to live with. I got back a month ago. I was We took 55 people from our community to the March of the Living and spent 8 days in Poland and then 3 days in Israel, which was a very, very moving, very powerful experience. A number of concentration camps and some of the centers of Jewish life that was and Jewish life that's regrowing in Poland now. And then we made it to Israel in time for Yom HaZikaron for Memorial Day, and then Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day. Very, very powerful and remarkable experience. I can tell you all about that. You all have read the news, so you know what crazy things are going on in Israel. This was the 22nd week of the demonstrations against the government. So that's what's going on in Israel. And there was something happening in America this weekend, but I forgot what it was. It had something to do with a president and some documents or something, I don't know, something like that. But it couldn't happen. It couldn't happen. So anyone have a question they've been dying to ask a rabbi? This is your last chance. Yeah, please go ahead.
I want to hear what you have to say. I just started it too.
I'm for
I
it.
know. It's been this for a while.
Israel is in the process of a remarkable reorganization. What's happened in Israel, of course, is they've had 5 elections in a row that were temporary. I mean, each government only lasted a few months. This last election, of course, brought the most right-wing government that Israel's ever had. And what's happened as a result, as a response to the policies of that government, is this tremendous political and social movement, this pro-democracy movement, these demonstrations that are going on. And there's 2 things. One is that when Ben-Gurion created the state in 1948, he left a certain number of questions unresolved. He was worried, for example, they didn't write a constitution because they were worried that that if they tried to write a constitution, that the divisions within the society would become so acute that they would never get around to actually having a country. They never resolved what would be the role of the ultra-Orthodox in that society. They never resolved what really is the role of Jewish religion in the national life of the community. They never really resolved who Israeli Arabs would be or are, what their rights and privileges and role in the country would be. All of these serious structural problems were not resolved in 1948, and Israelis have sort of muddled along for the last 75 years, papering over many of those problems, and now they've sort of, as I say, come home to roost. Certainly the question of the ultra-Orthodox, right? So in the last government, which was a more coalition, a more moderate government, there was a law that was passed that mandated that every child, including every ultra-Orthodox child, receive a certain core education in modern subjects, in mathematics, in science, in English, so that they would have the ability to have jobs in the culture. This government, which has a much stronger ultra-Orthodox representation, canceled that and just passed a budget which turned over a tremendous amount of educational money to the ultra-Orthodox with the idea that they do not have to follow that curriculum, that kids could simply get a traditional Talmudic education, which makes them fundamentally unemployable. So there's a serious question here about what do you do with ultra-Orthodox? What's their role in the society? Ultra-Orthodox men and women, the vast majority of ultra-Orthodox men and women do not serve in the Israeli military, right? The military is the mixer for Israeli culture. It's also a statement of loyalty to the country. So the question of what's their role in the country is being argued now, right? The question of the structure of the government is being argued. So these structural problems are being fought out now on the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The second thing that's happened is that Israel, like every culture, there's an extreme right and extreme left. Most people politically fall in the middle. But the governments that have been elected have been progressively more right-wing. And the middle seems to have lost its place in the government. That's the way coalition politics work. But what's happened is that this demonstration has brought about a voice for the middle. And the political middle has never been very loud in Israel. Now they have a voice. Now they're demanding a certain kind of revision of the society, and certainly revision of its policies. So we'll see where this goes, whether the current government can hang on, whether there'll be another election very soon. If they do last the 4 years, it's another 3.5 years. The next election, according to the polls, will bring us a very different kind of government in Israel. So it's a very, very interesting moment. If you want to hear more about this, Danny Gordis, who's a wonderful scholar, has a website where he does interviews with important Israeli leaders. And the last several have been wonderful. The other person, if you want, my favorite Israeli scholar is Yossi Klein Halevi. He's an old friend of mine, grew up in New York, made Aliyah in 1975. And Yossi has done a number of talks. The most recent one was one in San Francisco. He was interviewed by a dear friend of mine, Rabbi Graf. And you can just Google him, Yossi Klein Halevi, 2023, and it'll come up. And watch it. It's really excellent. His perceptions of what's going on, his vision of where Israel's going is really very wonderful and very, very clear to easily follow.
He was interviewed by Rabbi Horstman, too.
There you go. You can get Rabbi Vorsman's interview with him.
Rabbi Feinstein. He was interviewed by Rabbi
David, you can have him next time, okay? No, he's a wonderful, he's a dear friend and a wonderful scholar. And he's a journalist. Yossi is a journalist, lives in Jerusalem. And just he started out very far right wing. Yossi started out in the Jewish Defense League as a follower of Meir Kahane. And came to Israel, and he was very right wing. But having lived in Israel, he sort of moved to the political center. And now he's a tremendous voice for a sort of reasonable Israel. And I find him very, very useful. So his talks are very good. The Danny Gordis' work is very, very good. And you can find these online. And if you want to listen to a wonderful talk that really gives you an on-the-ground sense of it. We were there about 5-6 weeks ago now. We were there for Yom Ha'atzmaut. And there was tremendous upheaval. I mean, they put the politics aside for the holiday. They put the politics, but you can't put politics aside completely in Israel. The whole country is like a shul, you know. Everyone has opinions. And so wherever you go, you heard these conversations in cafes, in the supermarket, and on television, certainly, and in the street. Tremendous sense of upheaval and change coming to Israel. So that's where Israel is right now. That's where it's the country, ironically, has never been stronger politically, never been stronger militarily, never been stronger economically. You know, the population passed 8 million now, so, and it has become a world center of technology. The Abraham Accords has brought tremendous trade from the Gulf states and the Arab League, the Arab countries. Israel's now talking very openly with Saudi Arabia about coming to a peace agreement with the Saudis. The Saudis are the leaders of the Arab world, so that would be a tremendous boon to Israel. They're talking to the Chinese about economic development. Just an awful lot of wonderful things going on. So the country, in a certain way, like the best time to have a crisis is when everything else is okay in your life, you know. So here you have a country that's wealthy, powerful, safe. So they're having the personality crisis they've put off for so many years. That's what's going on in Israel right now. I'll be there in 3 weeks. I'll call you back and tell you how it is. We're going to go. I have a teaching position at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. So I go and I study and I teach, and it's a wonderful experience. If you ever have a chance to go, they have a week-long institute for lay folks, for ordinary Jews. You go and you take a hotel or an Airbnb in Jerusalem. You study with the greatest Jewish scholars in the world. You live in Jerusalem. You eat a lot of falafel, or shawarma, you better. It's a machaya. I mean, it's an absolute joy. So this every summer, we did this for many, many years, and then COVID came. So about 200 rabbis from around the world gather to study together. And I've done this now for 25 years. It's a great joy. It's a wonderful experience. So I used to be one of the young ones. Now I'm one of the elder statesmen. I don't know how that happened at all. I don't know. The world changed. I don't understand. Yes, Stanley.
Yes,
Hi.
I did the Hartman, as you know, in 2017, so it was wonderful. And I did the March of the Living in 2006. I wanted to go back to what was said at this year's March of the Living. It's always on live to watch on the internet, and I watched it. And the concluding speaker is often Rabbi Lau, who's the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Israel, and he concluded his speech this last year by saying that now, after 75 years, we as Jews know how to survive together. We just don't know how to live together.
No, actually, it was better than that. He said, we know how to die together. We don't know how to live together. It was a very powerful statement. It was the most powerful speech of the whole afternoon. There's about 13,000 people on the march. 10,000 of them are the most adorable high school students you've ever seen from all over the Jewish world, and 3,000 older people like us. And the wonderful thing is that the teenagers all get T-shirts for their own place where they come from. So the Brazilian kids wear yellow and green, which are Brazilian colors. The kids from Colombia wore red. The kids from Cincinnati had purple. The kids from LA had orange. So you could see this sea of colors. And over the course of the weeks we were there, the colors began to mix. And on the last day, we had a march in Jerusalem from the Safra Square, where Town Hall is, up into the Kotel. And the kids were all trading T-shirts, which was adorable. And one young man walked up to three very beautiful girls and said, "I'll trade you my T-shirt." And one of the kids hit him. But they did eventually trade all the T-shirts. It's not just an experience of Poland and Jerusalem, but it's an experience of this group of young Jews from all over the world coming together and finding each other and sharing prayer and sharing learning. It was that was a lovely part of the experience. That was the joyful part of the experience. The painful part of the experience was to be in the sites of the concentration camps, which of course is very devastating. And then to wonder what comes next. How are these stories to be told? There were a dozen or so survivors. But you have to realize what a survivor means, right? If somebody was 20 years old when they were liberated in 1945, they're 98 now. So there were only a dozen or so survivors. And in fact, this is so painfully, there was one man from Toronto who was a survivor who finished his talk to the group, a couple of thousand teenagers, felt kind of dizzy. He sat down, he passed out, and he passed away. So, I mean, in a certain way, it's horrifying. And in the other way, I think that's exactly what he got to talk to 3,000 Jewish teenagers from all over the country, all over the world, tell his story about how he was a prisoner in the concentration camp and got liberated, taught the kids to live a Jewish life, and then left this world surrounded by the people who loved him. So it was a kind of a terror. We all stood up and said Kaddish for him, Shabbos. So it was a terrible thing. So anyway, it was a profound experience. That in the next year or two, there won't be any survivors left to be able to go. Even now, there were just very, very, very few. And that was a very powerful experience. It was a very powerful experience. Good. Any other? I'll tell you all about baseball if you want to hear that. But that was it. Yeah, please.
Are you going to be having any tours to Poland? Did you take other people along?
Well, you know what? I did this one, and I got to tell you that I came back exhausted, physically exhausted because we did so much walking, and sort of spiritually depleted. It's really hard, Like I have been to concentration camps. I have been to Theresienstadt, which is in the Czech Republic. I have been to Dachau, which is in Germany, and Sachsenhausen, but I had never been to Poland before. And And it's very devastating, emotionally devastating. So people start saying, "Are you going to do it again?" Yeah, maybe one day, but not this year. This year, I think we're going to take a pilgrimage. I don't know, Cancun. I want to do like the Jewish tour of, Hawaii. I want to take you to the island of Oahu and Lanai and Kauai and the Jewish island of Alavai, where only Jews live. I want to do someplace like that, right? I actually had this idea for a Jewish tour of Las Vegas because I really want to walk through the lobby of the Luxor Hotel in a robe, singing Avadim Hayinu. Don't you think that way? Then we could go to Caesar's Palace and destroy the Holy Temple, and then we could go to Paris and do the Dreyfus trial. And then we could do, arrive in New York, with under the Statue of Liberty, and then if you want to know how a synagogue works, I'll take you to Circus Circus. So,
I see you've thought this through.
I have an idea. I'm going to patent this. This is going to be my retirement, David. You want to come? We'll do the Jewish tour of Las Vegas. So I think there's real possibilities here, But we'll do it again one of these days. I'm not sure I would go back on the March of the Living because that imposes, first of all, there's something inspiring about having all these thousands of kids. The problem is that there are thousands of kids, and if you really want to go and see these places, we had to schedule it in such a way that we didn't bump into thousands of kids. And so we're thinking of maybe doing it in a different way, but we'll see one of these days. We'll do it again. It's a remarkable, Poland, I've never been to Poland. Anyone been to Poland? It's a remarkable place. The country is a very complex country. And for Jews, it's a very interesting Jewish place because at one point, a third, more, like 80% of the Jewish world lived in Poland before the war. Warsaw was the biggest Jewish city ever. Warsaw was 40% Jewish. Krakow was 50% Jewish. These great cities, these great centers of Jewish life before the war. And since the war, there's a little bit of Jewish life. We just had the guy who's the head of the JCC in Krakow speak at our shul. And so there's a little bit of Jewish life coming back. What happened is a lot of young Poles who are rediscovering Jewish life and Jewish culture. And some of them are discovering they had Jewish grandparents. Because what we don't talk about is that there was intermarriage before the war. And so you have people that have a Jewish grandparent who just discovers that. But it's a very interesting country. It's a very, very interesting place. So we'll see, maybe. You want to come? We'll do it. We'll sign you up. Don't give me a check. Don't do it. We'll figure it out. Yes, please.
When you were talking about Israel and that it's a safe place, I get emails from MDA daily.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the safety?
Yeah. MD, it's, Magen David Adom and a number of other organizations. You are safer walking down any street in any city in Israel than you are walking down Wilshire Boulevard in LA. And statistically, I can prove this. Yes, there are people around Israel who want Israel to be destroyed, and there is a certain degree of terrorism that goes on in the country, and a certain degree of petty crime that goes on in the country. But I would still maintain it's a safer place to live. Israeli parents let their kids stay out till any hour of the night. The kids ride on buses and trains all over the place. It's a very safe country. It's you don't do anything stupid, but there's certain neighborhoods you don't go into, just like there are in New York. But it's a very, very safe country, and Jewish life in general is flourishing there. When I first went, when I was a kid, we went in 1970. My parents took us there. My parents had made Aliyah in 1949. And had to come back to America in 1953, and I was born the next year. So they hadn't been back since then. They took us in 1970. Most people start their tour by going to the hotel to pray to God. My father went to Supersol because when he left Israel in 1953, he was starving. There was no food in the country. And all he wanted to do was see food. He went to Supersol, and that's where he prayed, And today, and even those days, there was like one nice restaurant in the whole country. Now it's a foodie paradise. It's a beautiful country. Food, wine, art, music, literature, film, music, everything. It's a beautiful country. It's a wealthy country. You have a sense of real wealth. Yes, there's poverty too, but there's tremendous possibilities, tremendous wealth. And I think it's a very safe country. I'm not going to say anything bad about Magdeng David Adon. I will say that there are many organizations in our community that raise money on the basis of crisis. And they have to tell you there's a crisis going on. And so in order to raise the money, it has to be a crisis. Because if they ever said, things are pretty good, you'd stop sending money, right? I'll give you an example. There is a certain organization here in town that talks about anti-Semitism. Yes, there's anti-Semitism. They send black envelopes with big red letters. The Jews are threatened. Jews are dying. Jews are attacked. And I get these all the time because I gave them money once and now they send me money. They send me mail. And the only one that it scares is my mailman. I have a Mormon mailman who's the sweetest guy in the world. And he says, Rabbi, you okay? It's like, is everything all, can we do anything for you? I said, no, we're fine. It says Jews, don't. So, you got to take this crisis mentality with a sort of grain of salt, right? There are serious concerns about the world in general and about the Jewish people and about Israel. Don't get me wrong. I spend my time dealing with these issues. But crisis, you don't want to raise a community on a diet of crisis. Because crisis, and when there's a crisis, we tend not to think clearly. When there's a crisis, we tend to divide the world into us and them. When there's a crisis, we tend to make rash decisions. And I don't think crisis is the way to make good decisions. So give money to Magen David, they're good people. And give money to all these other organizations, including the ones that fight anti-Semitism. They're good people. But don't get like your hair's not on fire. That's not necessary. So be careful with the crisis mentality in the community. Right? Hi.
What is your take on Netanyahu and the way he's attacking the Supreme Court? Where's that going?
Where's it going? God, I wish I knew. Right now, right now he is on trial for 3 very serious counts of corruption. He may end up in jail. He literally may end up, running the country from in jail. This could happen because the trial's going on right now, right? And so part of the Supreme Court thing is Israel doesn't have a constitution. The way that the Israeli government functions is sort of the accretion of custom and the way we do, the way government works. And over the years, the Supreme Court in Israel has taken on more and more power. And there's a felt need to rebalance between the judicial and the legislative bodies of Israeli government. It's a parliamentary government, so there's no executive. It's judiciary and legislative. So this right-wing government put in a series of laws that would completely move the power back to the legislature. Okay? Many people in Israel, that's the 200,000 people who demonstrate every Saturday night, believe that's not good for Israel because the legislature tends to reflect the prejudices of the populace and not necessarily the rights of minorities, the rights of women, the rights of gay people, the rights of religious or non-religious people. And that's been the role of the Supreme Court. So Netanyahu has been part of that movement, A, in order to keep his prime ministership, because the only way he could keep his coalition together, and B, many people believe, I can't demonstrate this, that part of that is in order to keep himself out of jail. Because if he rebalances the Supreme Court, a new judge may rule him, may acquit him instead of convict him. So there is a concept in the Talmud called nogeya badavar, which means you have a vested interest in a particular law. And a rabbi is not permitted to make a decision. You can't ask me for the kashrus of a particular product if I own the store that sells that product. Why? I'm nogea badavar. I have a vested interest in that law. I won't look carefully at what's the ingredients of that thing. I'll tell you it's kosher because I want you to buy it. Well, it's pretty clear to see that right now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is nogea badavar. He has a vested interest in this judicial overhaul because that's the court that's deciding his political and personal fate. You get it? Right? So that becomes an issue. And right now, I couldn't tell you what's going to happen. It's very clear that the Knesset is not ready to pass this overhaul because they are terrified that they're going to completely get wiped out in the next election. So they're talking compromise. President Herzog, the president of Israel, is not supposed to have any political role whatsoever, but Herzog has been taken on the role of sort of mediating between the sides and trying to find a consensus that everybody in Israel could agree on. And right now he hasn't been successful yet. We'll see where that goes. Don't ask me what's going to happen next. With Israel, you never know what's going to happen next. It's always interesting. Just like it is in America. I mean, the person I feel sorry for in the world is Aaron Sorkin. He's the guy that writes all this political drama on television, like The West Wing, because you couldn't write the story of the former president and his issues. No writer could have come up with such a scenario. So I mean, you got to enjoy this as drama. Someday our kids will read about it in history books and go, "What?" You know. So Israel's the same way. I mean, with a prime minister, with the characters in the Knesset, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, with the people on the street, it's just been fascinating. But I have no idea where it's going to go. I'll be there in 3 weeks. I'll call you and tell you. You know, so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Yeah, please.
I had thought a few years ago there was what I would call some progress made on the question of the ultra-Orthodox serving in some capacity.
Yes, there was, and it was just erased by this Knesset. That's the point.
Okay.
There was progress made on bringing the ultra-Orthodox into the society. So they would serve in the military. So they were beginning to have some units of the Israeli military that included ultra-Orthodox men and even some ultra-Orthodox women. That was a big deal. B, there was this question of the curriculum of the school, right? People who are raised in the ultra-Orthodox community, by the way, it's not just in Israel. The same issue happened in New York. If you remember, about a year ago, there was a series of articles in the New York Times. It was actually the only article in the New York Times that was ever published in Yiddish. They published an expose because the schools, the New York schools in the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Rockland County were not teaching the core curriculum that the regents of New York State demand, but they were taking money from New York State. And so the New York Times did an expose. The problem is that if you don't get that core curriculum, so you'll know a lot of Talmud and a lot of Bible and a lot of codes, Maimonides and Shulchan Aruch and maybe some Medrash and some Kabbalah. But if you can't add or subtract, if you don't do basic mathematics, if you can't read English at a reasonable level, if you know nothing about basic science, in Israel, if you can't read English, right? Every Israeli school kid starts English in the 2nd or 3rd grade because, like in many countries around the world right now, English is the language of the world, and you have your own private language. So in Denmark and in Holland and other countries, you do your language and then English. Everybody studies English. The internet is in English. If you can't do that, well, you're not employable. So this is a question. So the Knesset passed a law that said you have to teach these things for a certain number of hours, just like the New York State regents did. But this community pushed back against it. And the Knesset just passed the law that said, no, you don't have to anymore. Which means you're relegating literally hundreds of thousands of people unemployable. And that's a scary thing. That's a scary thing. Now, there is the only redeeming factor, I will tell you this. we took a field trip with the Hartman people some years ago to a city outside of Jerusalem called Beitar Illit, which is a brand new city built for 35,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews. Okay? It's a beautiful, brand new city. It's about 5-10 minutes outside the boundaries of Jerusalem. And the whole city is people that grew up in Mea Shearim, in the very, very Orthodox neighborhoods, which are now getting very crowded. So they built a city for these people. The whole city is ultra-Orthodox. Everybody in the city has a long black coat and a big beard, even the women, right? And we sat with the town, with several members, the mayor and several members of the town council. The guy who's the mayor tells us, I am 10th generation Yerushalmi. 10th generation's Jerusalem. You know, every male in my family is a rabbi. Every male in my family is a scholar, studies Talmud all day long. And by the way, the guy I'm talking to, big beard, big hat, black coat, frum. You get the picture? And he says to us, this was never supposed to be like this. In Europe, the very, very, very brightest men got to learn all day long. Everybody else went to work. You never had a class of people who of all kinds of, who studied all day long. If you're the best and the brightest, you study. But if you're not, you go to work. He said, everybody in my family works. He says, so here in Beitar Illit, we are building a Dell computer call center. So if you call Dell Computer because your computer's not working, in the middle, you're either going to get a guy from Bangalore, India. Hello, can I help you? Or you're going to get a guy from Beitar Illit, Israel. And you'll say, my computer doesn't work. And he'll say, okay, here's what you do. And he said, this is what it should be. And the high school, there's a big high school there that has a huge Microsoft computer center. And the guy says, we are what you call Haredi Le'umi. Haredi means ultra-Orthodox. Le'umi means nationalist. So there is a growing consensus within the young of the ultra. And we asked him, by the way, what do the rabbis think? What do your 10 generations of ancestors think? He said they think we're rebels and they reject us. But he represents a new movement within the ultra-Orthodox, the young ultra-Orthodox, who are saying we have to be part of the economy. We can't sponge off the secular people forever. It's not good for our community for us to be only taking government money and not contributing anything. It's not good for our children to see whole parts of the population not making a living. It's just wrong. So there's an argument within the ultra-Orthodox community about this. But by and large, this new government erased all that progress. So we'll see what happens next.
Can you also talk about the origin of that exemption, how that started? I imagine it was some kind of a compromise.
Yeah, what happened at the beginning of the state, there were 3,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel, and they came to Ben Gurion and they say, what do you think? And they said to him, look, we've lost so many scholars, so many students, so many books, so much learning in the Holocaust. Let us have an exemption so we can rebuild. So he allowed them an exemption. He didn't expect it to have 300,000 men not studying. Now look, there's nothing wrong with that. In American universities, we have such thing as a postdoctoral research fellowship. Right? If anybody in your family ever got a PhD in something and they were particularly smart, they would then apply for a postdoctoral research fellowship. A postdoctoral research fellowship, you finish your doctorate, and then you get money from the national. For example, at UCLA, my son was working in a laboratory there. He was working for this wonderful young woman. She has a PhD in microbiology. They're working on IBS, inflammatory bowel disease. Yeah, irritable bowel disease. And she is working on, they're finding the genetic markers for that disease. And she had a postdoctoral research fellow. She finished her research, she finished her PhD at UCLA and got a postdoctoral research fellowship to take 3 more years and do more research. All right, so that's the same thing. If you have a young person who's extraordinarily bright, you make it possible for them to continue learning. That's great. Everybody else goes back to work. You don't have a situation where you have thousands and thousands of young men who really should be working, but instead are sitting and learning just because they want to, and not making a living, and collecting welfare, and collecting and sitting in public housing, and spawning hundreds of children. They all have 15, 18 kids. So they're not just studying, you know. And the military. Well, that's the thing that if you ask a secular Israeli, that drives them nuts. Because these same people vote and they set policies, but they don't have to go defend those policies on a battlefield. Then it gets nasty. That's when it gets really ugly. Anyway, let's hope these people can work this out. Let's hope that they come to some. It's hard for Jews to come to consensus, but you can begin to see a consensus forming in Israel, and that's the hopeful part. It's hard. You can begin to see where the middle is going to be, and hopefully that's the way the politics goes. Yes, please.
Speaking of young people, our grandson is going off to college in another state.
Mazel tov. Where's he going?
He's going to Minnesota.
Oh, very nice. Bring a very warm sweater. Because cold, you have no idea. He lives here, and he's going to Minnesota. Gott helfen. Does he do this? Do this. Come to Valley Beshalom for a day with him, okay? We have a walk-in freezer. It's 10 degrees, right? We'll put him in the freezer for half an hour and tell him that's a spring day in Minneapolis. Just cold, you have no idea from cold until you spend an hour in Minnesota.
My question, of course, is what I hear about anti-Semitism on campuses.
Yeah. Yeah, nasty. It's pretty bad. It starts with this very, very left-wing anti-Zionism, right? And so certain professors and certain organizations. What's been really nice, though, Minnesota happens to be a very welcoming campus and not a very political campus. My kids were in Indiana, the same thing. So the Palestinian students put up an anti-apartheid demonstration in the middle of the yard, and the Jewish kids built an alliance with the Black Students Alliance. So the Jewish kids and the Black Student Alliance put a Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration together, opposite the anti-apartheid. And you'll see this on lots of college campuses. Again, the Jewish community, how do I put this gently without offending anybody? Well, I'll offend you. The Jewish community loves crisis. Loves crisis. So whenever there's a hint of crisis, we jump. Okay? So for example, one of the very famous crises, there was an article published, I think it was in our Jewish journal here, that on the Berkeley campus, there's a law school, Berkeley Law School, and the Berkeley Law School, there was a policy that certain clubs would not invite any Israelis whatsoever. And there was a whole article about how anti-Semitic and anti-Israel the Berkeley Law School is. And then the response came from Erwin Chemerinsky, who's the dean of the Berkeley Law School, who's a Jewish guy. I happen to know him. He's a wonderful guy. Who's a very identified Jew, who's a very identified Zionist, and Adam Naftulin, who's the rabbi of the Hillel on the Berkeley campus, who obviously grew up in my shul, and he's a friend of mine, who said, yeah, there are anti-Israel people in the Berkeley Law School. There are 98 student clubs in the Berkeley Law School. 2 of them are anti-Israel. The other 96 deal with other things, are not interested in that. And if you just focus on the ones who don't like us, yeah. Same thing in my kid's school in India. Your grandson is going to meet professors who don't like Jews and don't like Israel. Then there's a beautiful Hillel on the mini, and a great Chabad, and a wonderful Moshe house, and a wonderful, all these Jewish fraternities there. So, yeah, he's going to meet anti-Semitism, mazel tov. he's also going to meet lots of opportunities to find himself as a Jew on that campus. And I think he'll be fine. There are some campuses which are more anti-Semitic than others, but Minnesota is not one you have to worry about. This exists on college campuses, but it's not nearly the hair on fire crisis that you read about in Jewish newspapers, because again, there's too much crisis mentality in the community, right? And that's something you got to be very, very careful about, right? The chances are, though, he's going to come back with green hair and an earring or a nose ring and maybe a tattoo and a girlfriend named named Silver Feather. Remember the old joke? He went to college and he came and said, "Mom, I'm marrying a Native American girl." And then the mama, "Don't worry, we're going to have a baby, but he's going to be raised Jewish. His name's going to be Whitefish." So don't worry, Mama, don't worry. I mean, you're more likely to have him come back as a vegan communist with red hair, with purple hair and a nose ring than you are having him come back feel like his Jewishness is threatened. The problem on college campuses, I will say this, the problem on college campuses is not that some anti-Semitic professor is going to make him feel unwelcome on the college campus. The problem on the college campus is you have young people who go to a place where they begin to reimagine their entire identity. This is where kids go through a question of who am I and where do I belong? And the question is, does he have a sense that Jewishness is part of him and that he can choose to make Jewishness an important part of him? That's the bigger issue compared to all the other things that are claiming him. So one of the nice things is they have this program called Birthright. Has he been on Birthright yet? Signed him up. Tell him to go on Birthright. Because it's a free trip to Israel. Free. Did everybody hear that word? Free trip to Israel. You go with lots of Jewish kids. They have a very wonderful time. They meet each other. They gain, and what happens is kids who come back from that trip come back with a very deep sense of belonging to the Jewish people and look for different ways of expressing that belonging. That's the bigger issue. The bigger issue isn't anti-Semitism. The bigger issue is an identity crisis that kids go through. Too many kids go to college and they decide that Jewishness has nothing to do with them anymore. And they leave it all behind, right? And that's the bigger issue. That's the bigger issue, okay? Okay, that was good, though. Thank you for that question. And I would suggest that you go visit him. Meet him in Florida on spring break or something like that. You ever been to Minnesota? It's beautiful. 2 months a year. It's gorgeous. The rest of the year, in the summertime, they have mosquitoes the size of Volkswagens. And in the wintertime, it's like Antarctica. It's awful. I mean, it's just cold. It's a wonderful university, though, I got to tell you. It's just they have these tunnels, you see. You don't have to go outside. You never breathe fresh air. It's too cold. You'll see. It's wonderful. All right, other questions. Stanley.
I wanted to go back to what Rabbi Lau said, that we don't know how to live together. And I think he was speaking to the whole Jewish world, not just to Israelis, not just people that are at the margin of living. And I'd like to know if you have anything to say to our community, which you know.
We live together. Look, we're happy.
This is the culture that we're in.
Yeah. We're also at an inflection point in American Jewish life, right? April 1964, Look magazine, which was the second most popular news magazine in North America, published an article called "The Vanishing American Jew." It was written by a guy named Newman. Thomas Newman is a senior editor. They gathered up in 1964, all of the existing demographic data, and they said, look, American Jews are entering the third generation. Most of us came between 1884 and 1920. That was the first generation. The second generation, left the Lower East Side and moved out to Brooklyn or moved up to Westchester, left Boyle Heights and came down to West Adams and then moved to Fairfax, right? The third generation, that's me, raised in the Valley, right? Raised in West Bloomfield in Detroit, or raised in Highland Park, Illinois, or 5 towns in New York or Westchester, New York. The third generation starts to lose its connection with the ethnic culture of its grandparents. That's what all American ethnic groups do. And Newman says in this article, 1964, that this third generation American Jews doesn't have the same connection with Jewishness that its grandparents did. It sees Jewish culture like, the same way that Little Italy, there's no Italians in Little Italy now, all the cooks are Mexican, right? And Chinatown has very few Chinese people, right? But in 3 generations, we tend to blend into the American melting pot. And he said in 1964 that by 1980, American Jewish life will wane significantly, and by 2000, there'll be virtually no Jews left in America. 1964. Okay? Well, what's amazing is, of course, Look magazine's gone, and we're here. And, this beautiful high school that's here, is booming. I mean, those of you who grew up in, like I did, in this neighborhood, could you imagine that there'd be a Jewish high school here? Like, not in a million years. And across the country. So, American Jewish life is still alive. And there's kids who come to my school. We have a nursery school at the shul. And I got kids who are 5th and 6th generation American Jews. Right? Their great-grandparents were born in America, which is like mind-boggling, right? And yet they still have some sort of identification with Jewishness. Now, it's not the Jewishness of their great-grandparents, but there is a sense of Jewish connection. So we're at an inflection point in the life of our community, and we'll see where it goes. We'll see what happens. We'll see how it works. Sometimes there are various, if you study the history of American Judaism, it's not a steady decline of assimilation the way we thought it was. Instead, you have these sort of revivals. You have these very powerful revivals of religious interest, of cultural interest, of Israel. I mean, so the latest study, the Federation just put out a population study of Los Angeles. You saw that. There's a lot being written about it. And what they found was something really interesting. Younger American Jews, younger LA Jews between the ages of 25 and 50 are more identified with Judaism than their parents were. Yeah. They're more active, they're more identified. Not with institutions. They don't join shuls or JCCs or organizations, but if you ask them about their concerns, they have more Jewish concerns and deeper Jewish concerns than their parents did. Go figure. Right? So it's a very complicated business. It's not just a business of decline. It's not just a business of, my kids don't want to come to shul. Yeah, they don't want to come to shul, but they're doing other Jewish things like this birthright thing. So it's a very complicated. So Stanley, the answer is American Jewish life is at an inflection point now because we're going to see what the next generation brings. Right? We just went through 3 of the hardest years in American Jewish life because of COVID. Right? For 2 years, I ran a synagogue online. And now we have this. Right? We have hybrid online, in-person communities. And the question is, what effect will this have? What effect does it have? Or I can tell you, you want to hear Danny Gordis' latest talk on Israel, you don't have to go find Danny Gordis. You can just find him online. That's amazing. Or Yossi Klein Halevi. I mean, so we will see where Jewish life goes. And everyone is subject to this. That's what's so interesting. There's no boundaries, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Zionist, not so Zionist. We're all in this together trying to figure out what the next generation of identity is going to be. Hello! I'm famous. There we are. So it's a very interesting moment in the history of the community, right? And we'll see what happens. We'll see where it takes us. One of the things that Rabbi Loud may not know, because I don't know if he's been to L.A. There are rivalries and jealousies and stuff, but I mean, Rabbi Forsman could confirm this. We get along, by and large. I mean, there are some people we don't like, but all right, everyone. But I have a lot of friends who were Reform rabbis. I have a lot of friends who are Orthodox rabbis. I even have friends who are Chabad rabbis, right? I got friends who were ministers. I got friends. And the fact is that sometimes overtly, so there's a very, very Orthodox rabbi in the community. I invited him to speak at VBS. It was wonderful. Guy came. He said to me, let's have dinner. So he brought his wife. And one of the kosher restaurants in town, we sat, we had Nina and I, and he and his wife, had a wonderful dinner, traded stories. It was wonderful. And then he came to the shul and he spoke. And so somebody raised their hand and said, you're here. Would you ever invite Rabbi Feinstein to your shul? And he said, not that he did, not that he wouldn't want to. He said, I want to. It's just, my community isn't ready for that yet. He said, my community is much more judgmental than you are. So, all right, so those things exist. That kind of prejudice might exist. But the fact is that he came to Valley Beth Shalom. He learned with us. He taught us. And he and I have had a wonderfully close relationship. And he's helped me in a number of places. And I've tried to help him where I can help him. So we're actually, there's more unity in this community than it might look like on the surface. Okay? Right? They really get along with each other pretty well, which is kind of nice, kind of wonderful.
Better than us.
No, there you go.
It's the way it should be.
Better than us. Better than us. Kosher restaurants help because that way everybody can eat. You've been to Tel Aviv, right? His brothers at Tel Aviv, the fish restaurant. Right? Yeah, but expensive. Woo. That's how you do it, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Right. Anyway, all right. Anyone else have a? Yes, please.
Well, I just want to mention, a lot of universities have departments of Jewish studies.
Yes.
And,
every university nowadays.
It could be Minnesota.
Minnesota has a huge one. Yeah, you can get a doctorate in Jewish studies in Minnesota. We lived in Dallas, Texas for 10 years, never. And so the big university in Dallas is called Southern Methodist University, which is all three of those things. In that order, by the way. Southern, very Methodist, and sort of a university. While I was there, they hired Susie Heschel, Professor Heschel's daughter, to be their first Jewish studies professor. So I had to say, Shechiani, that Abraham Joshua Heschel's daughter is teaching Talmud to the Southern Methodist University. And used to say, Missy and Buffy are studying Gemara with Susie. It was quite a thing. And it was a wonderful. No, if SMU can have a Jewish studies department, anybody. UCLA has a wonderful Jewish studies department. SC has a wonderful Jewish studies. And if those of you who know LA Jewry, if I say SC has Jews, that's a sentence you couldn't have said a generation ago. So it's an amazing thing. These are amazing things. So every American university has a Jewish studies. Maybe not Bob Jones or maybe not Brigham Young, but most every American Jewish, every state university, major university, Harvard, Yale, they all have major Jewish studies departments. You can get a doctorate in Jewish studies at any of those places, which is a big deal. Yeah, very, very big deal. It's a very, very big deal. All right, who else has a question? Brian, do you have a question?
I have four.
Brian has a question. We've known each other since we were little kids. So
I have four questions, but I know you're tired.
I'm not tired. I'm
pick one of the four to answer me.
All right, I'll fudge two, and we'll answer one, and go ahead.
The first one is about you. How are you feeling, and how is Nina doing, and your children?
Thank you. I'm feeling great. I'm in the process of retiring from the full-time pulpit. I don't know what that means yet, so we'll find that out next year. Nina's fine, thank God. We have a granddaughter now, the most beautiful, brilliant child who ever lived. They live in Mesa, Arizona, which is the opposite of Minnesota. It's hot like hell. You wake up 7 o'clock in the morning, it's 100 degrees. It's crazy in Arizona. But my daughter has a job. She's a psychologist there. And she has a very, very nice job in a clinic. And my son-in-law is going to school for a degree in computers. And my granddaughter is preparing for her Harvard entrance exam. She's 15 months old, and she's getting ready to go to Harvard. So, yes, we're doing really well. The other kids are happy. and they're doing fine. My son works for me at the shul. Yona works for me now, and Rafi's in the community. Yes, we're happy. Thank you.
Will you keep speaking? Because we said we need people like Rabbi Borstein and you to educate.
Well, I can't speak for Rabbi Vorspan. He's much more energetic than I am, so I suspect he'll keep speaking. And I'm not going anywhere for a little while. We'll see. I'm trying to cut back a little bit so I have a little time to do some of the things I didn't have a chance to do before. But we'll see what happens. We're going to Israel for a couple of weeks, so that'll be nice. Yeah.
And maybe the other three questions we should say.
No, go ahead. Go. I'm not going anywhere. Go ahead.
Because you're probably, how does the Jewish community, you kind of answered this, right? Get young people to care or be involved in Judaism? Like we had USY, and you said birthright.
Yeah.
But you kind of answered that.
If I knew how to get young people involved, boy.
Because my nephew is going to college.
Yeah. I can't tell you that there's a formula. I can tell you that we have tried in the community, and the community continues to try to open doors and to allow kids to find their way in. So Campus Hillel's, Birthright, Chabad, trips to Israel, opportunities in our community, Chavarot, and various kinds of new initiatives to welcome young people into the community. The high school here, and Milken, these wonderful new Jewish high schools. We've tried very hard. It's hard because these kids live in a world, they live in a world where there's so many claims on them. They're invited into so many different worlds. And we're trying to invite them into a Jewish world. And that's not always easy. It's not always easy. On the other hand, what gives me some pause is that our nursery school at the shul is full. And I see so many young families show up with little kids. So maybe it is that you're supposed to go out there and sort of sow your wild oats religiously and ideologically. And then when you nest, when you find a life partner and you begin to build a home and a family, you start to feel the need to have challah on the table and Shabbos candles and a Seder. And that's been our experience, is you start to see these young families. So we had a thing at the shul. We gave out Shabbos candles. We got Shabbos candles. We put a ribbon around them with a little piece of paper, a little brochure on how to light Shabbos candles. And I stood at the gate handing out Shabbos candles on Friday morning. So three different kinds of people would pass by. The first woman would pass by with her baby carriage and a little kid, and she'd say, "No, Rabbi, don't worry. I light candles every Friday night." I'd say, "God bless you. Good Shabbos." The next one would walk by, and she would say, "Gee, I've never done this before. How do I do it?" So I say, "Okay, good. Here's the brochure. You can either read the brochure or go. There's a website. You click on this, and there's a demonstration, a little video showing you how to do it." She said, "Oh, wonderful. The kids do it in school. I want to do it at home." That's a beautiful thing. The interesting one is the third one. You know what the third one says to me? I hand her the Shabbos candles, and she says to me, No, my mother lights Shabbos candles. And then she looks down at the baby carriage. She says, "Oh, I guess it's my turn." Right? I guess it's my turn. So this happens. And the other great story, Brian, I'll tell you the other great stories. My wife, Nina, she has a nephew. She has a nephew. The nephew married the most beautiful, wonderful, delicious Thai girl. Her parents actually own a Thai restaurant in downtown LA. So Paulina comes into our family, right? And they live here in LA while my nephew is training for something. And they're living here. And, she goes to my mother-in-law's house where she sees Passover and she sees Shabbos and she sees Hanukkah. They moved across the country. They moved to Fairfax, Virginia. Fairfax, Virginia, she's looking for a nursery school for her two little daughters. They find the local JCC. So she calls us up and she says, "Uncle Eddie, what do you think of the JCC as a nursery school?" I say, "It's probably terrific. Let me find out." So I looked it up. It's a great place. Go there. So she goes there. She calls us 3 weeks later. Ready? She says, "The kids make challah on Friday in the nursery school. They want to make challah at home. Can you send me your challah recipe?" This is my Thai niece. So I sure. So I send her the recipe, and a video showing her how to do it, right? So now 3 weeks after that, she calls back and she says, the kids want to light candles. Can you show me how to do that? So not only that, so we went to Shalom House and bought them Shabbos candlesticks and mailed them the Shabbos candlesticks with another video on how to light Shabbos candles. 3 weeks later, she calls me and she says, how do I get him to come home on Friday night so we can have Shabbos dinner together? This is my Thai niece, who is technically not Jewish, but what has she discovered? She's discovered how to do Jewish, right? So I said, put him on a line, and I say, Schmuck, come home. Your wife wants to make Shabbos. He says, I'm not religious. I mean, if you're religious, this is the best thing you can do with your kids. So he calls back 3 weeks later and says, you were right. We do it now. It's the greatest thing in the world. So then, of course, Pesach comes, and she calls again. So here's the question. It's an interesting ideological question that we rabbis fight with. Is Jewish what you are, or is Jewish what you do? Think about that a minute. We always assumed being Jewish was important. All right, maybe it is. How about doing Jewish? Right? Will this girl convert one day? I don't know. Frankly, it's not all that important to me. She's lighting candles, making challah, setting a table, getting her husband to come home, making a seder. They gathered some friends from the school. They made a seder. They're making Hanukkah. They're building a sukkah. Okay? Go figure. I mean, so if this is the cultural trend, I'm very happy with this. So there we are. As I have one Jew in the world that I made. All right, Brian, what's your next question?
Is it a not good thing?
I'm going to go home soon, but go ahead. A bad one?
Yeah.
Oh.
My sister is very.
I know your sister. I love your sister.
And APAC and everything. And so,
APAC is the king of crisis, yeah.
And so, I don't know, what did I say? Okay. How do you speak to her? Like, we have arguments about Israel a lot, and she thinks Israel can do no wrong, and everything. And but you kind of talked about that a lot today, how you speak to people.
I'll tell you what the answer to that is in particular, but the bigger question of crisis we should talk about. The difference between the way we talk about Israel and its future and the way Israel talks about its future, right? Israelis, the political spectrum in Israel is much wider and much more tolerant than the political spectrum here, right? You go to open up an Israeli newspaper, read Haaretz, right? I mean, they're not afraid to criticize their government. They're not afraid to criticize their culture. Israeli music, we did a course last year on Israel, everything but politics. Art, music, television, theater, literature. And you see a culture that is fully developed, right? We were once a culture on the edge. And we had to be very careful about what we say. We're not there anymore. We can now afford to have conversations about what should Israel be? How should Israel behave? And when Israel does stuff that shouldn't be, that it knows it shouldn't be doing, we can say that out loud without having to worry that we're going to somehow inflame anti-Semitism worldwide. Right? In Israel, they have these conversations all the time. All the time. It's the greatest sport in Israel. They like football, they enjoy basketball, but politics is the national sport, right? I mean, think about this. 200,000 people demonstrating in Tel Aviv every Saturday night. What does that tell you? That they're able to criticize the government and still love the country. We can criticize a government and still love a country. We can criticize its culture and still love it. You can do that in America. You can do that in Israel. And we can have an open conversation about what we like and what we don't like. And that's okay. That's fine. I mean, that's the answer. People who tell me you can't say anything critical about Israel have never been to Israel. They don't speak Hebrew. They haven't been to Israel. Right? So I suggest that you just go to Israel and see what's done there, and you'll have a whole different attitude about this, right? You have a whole different attitude about this.
In this case,
yeah.
Personally,
yeah.
He and Janet are very seriously in trouble with each other.
Okay, I'm sorry.
For several years. all over their political opinion with
If you're
Israel.
against Israel, you're anti-Semitic.
I can't stand this thing.
Well, then, if that's the case, then are you saying that those hundreds of thousands of people in Israel who are demonstrating against the government are anti-Semitic? I mean,
It isn't against, it's their.
you have different opinions about where the country should go. Look, if I criticize the President of the United States, am I anti-American? If I criticize a law of Congress, am I anti-American? If I criticize a decision of the Supreme Court, am I anti-American? No, I love America. I love what America promises. I love what Israel promises. I want to see a future. I want to see its future thrive. The only way it's going to thrive is if we have an open discussion of these things. To shut off discussion is not helpful. It doesn't help build support for anything. It's anti-democratic. And it's not a great way of engendering good ideas for anything. Look, you all belong to a shul. Everyone love everything the rabbi ever says. Everything love the way the services go. The only one is Bonnie. She's the only one. She's allowed to criticize him, right? But the truth is, in any community, we're going to have opinions. It doesn't mean we don't love each other and care for each other and protect each other and support what we're doing together. The crisis mentality is not helpful. First of all, it's not helpful because when there really is a crisis, you don't know how to respond because you've been crying wolf all this time. Second of all, when there's a crisis, you raise the adrenaline level, which means you're not thinking clearly. You're not making good decisions. You're not finding all the options ahead of you. The crisis mentality puts us on the edge all the time. It's just not a healthy way to be. And the most important thing is, if I'm a kid and I'm asking myself, what's in Jewish life? And all I hear is crisis, crisis, crisis. I'm going to choose something else. I'm going to choose something else. You can only eat so much spicy food. Every now and again, you got to have vanilla. So I think that, in terms of engendering a sense of loyalty among the young, I think instead of crisis, we should think about hope.
Here's how I would have looked at it.
Think about hope, right? I want to live in a world where anti-Semitism is stamped out. I want to live in a world where all hatred is stamped out. I hope for that. I hope for an Israel which is at peace and secure and prosperous and whole. I hope for that. Let's move from a language of crisis to a language of hope. And you'll find, I think, that young people will respond in a much more positive way. That's sort of how I think about these things. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Take care. David, thank you.
Rabbi Eddie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stanley.
You're right, and thanks to Judy for putting this together.
Thank you.
And I want everybody to have cookies and coffee before they go or something, or we're going to waste it. And for those that don't know, the Jewish Journal featured Rabbi Vorspan.
Yay!
The article was just okay, but the picture was great.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks.
Oh, by the way, Eddie, the grandmother of the whitefish?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a favorite one. Right. Don't worry, we use a milk comma.
Did you record this too? Did you record it?
Yeah, it's all recorded.
Say goodbye to everybody. All righty. Thank you all for being on. And Lynn, you may want to just contact Israel.
Do you have his email address that I could write to him?
Yeah, you can. Right. I don't know that I'll ask him on the way out, but you may find just contacting him through the congregation. He can answer you specifically.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. All righty. Goodbye, everybody. Have a terrific week. Thank you for being with us.
Okay.